Story 1. The Shifting Furniture. I was 24, fresh out of college, and had just moved into my first solo apartment. It was a small, one-bedroom unit in an old building downtown, with high ceilings and creaky hardwood floors. It had character, I told myself, a certain charm that modern apartments lacked. The rent was surprisingly affordable, which, in hindsight, should have been my first red flag. I moved in during late spring, the city alive with the promise of summer, and for the first few weeks, everything was perfect. Then, the subtle oddities began. I'd wake up in the morning to find my living room furniture slightly rearranged. A chair would be a few inches to the left, a small side table angled differently. At first, I dismissed it as my own forgetfulness, or perhaps a slight tremor in the old building. I'd straighten everything, make a mental note of its position, and go about my day. But it kept happening. Every few days, something would be out of place. It was never drastic, just enough to be unsettling, to make me question my own memory. I started taking pictures of my living room before I went to bed, a small, private experiment. In the morning, I'd compare the photos, and there it was, undeniable. Proof. The armchair had indeed moved, the rug was slightly askew, the stack of magazines on the coffee table had shifted. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I was alone in the apartment. The doors were locked. There was no logical explanation. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. I'd be sitting on the couch, reading, and I'd feel a distinct chill, a sudden drop in temperature, as if someone had just walked past me. I'd glance up, but the room would be empty. The silence in the apartment, once comforting, now felt oppressive, heavy, with an unseen presence. I started leaving the TV on at night, just for the background noise, anything to fill the suffocating quiet. One night, I woke up to a faint scraping sound coming from the living room. It was slow, deliberate, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest. I lay there, frozen, listening, trying to rationalize it. A neighbor, the building settling, but the sound was too distinct, too close. I crept out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cold floor, and peered into the living room. The moonlight streaming through the window cast long, eerie shadows. And then I saw it. The armchair. It was slowly, almost imperceptibly, sliding across the floor, moving towards the center of the room. There was no one there. No strings, no wires, no visible force. It was moving on its own, a silent, ghostly dance. I stood there, paralyzed by fear, watching as the chair completed its slow, deliberate journey, coming to rest in the middle of the room, facing the empty space where my bed was. It was as if someone, or something, was sitting there, watching me sleep. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the chair, until I was safely back in my bedroom. I spent the rest of the night huddled under my covers, the lights on, listening to the silence, convinced that whatever was in my living room was now watching me. The next morning, I packed a bag, called a friend, and left. I never went back to that apartment. I broke my lease, forfeited my deposit, and moved into a brightly lit, modern building with no character and no unsettling surprises. To this day, I can't stand to have furniture out of place, and the thought of an empty room still fills me with a profound sense of unease. I know what happens when things start to shift on their own, and I never want to experience that silent, ghostly dance again. That armchair, moving on its own, became the focal point of my terror. I tried to find a logical explanation, a hidden mechanism, a prank by a previous tenant. I even had a building inspector come in, but he found nothing amiss, just an old building with settling foundations. He looked at me strangely when I tried to explain the moving furniture, and I quickly changed the subject. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I started to feel a profound sense of invasion, as if my personal space was no longer my own. I would often find small, personal items moved, a toothbrush from the holder to the sink, a specific book from my shelf to the floor, always in plain sight, as if to taunt me. I began to research the building's history. It was old, built in the early 1900s, and had a long, unremarkable past as a residential apartment complex. No murders, no suicides, no tragic fires, nothing that would explain the unsettling occurrences. But then, I found a small, almost overlooked article in an old digital newspaper archive. It was about a family who had lived in my exact unit in the 1950s. The article detailed the sudden, unexplained disappearance of their young daughter, a girl named Emily. She had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only her favorite teddy bear and a small, handmade doll. The police had no leads, and the case eventually went cold. The family moved out shortly after, unable to bear the silence of the empty apartment. A cold dread settled over me. Emily, the shifting furniture, the feeling of being watched. It all clicked into place. It wasn't a malevolent spirit, not exactly. It was a child, lost and perhaps lonely, still playing in her old home, still waiting for her family to return. The thought was both heartbreaking and terrifying. I started leaving out small toys, a doll, a teddy bear, hoping to appease her, to make her feel less alone. For a few days, the furniture stopped moving. The chill in the air lessened. I almost started to believe I had found a way to coexist. But then, one morning, I woke up to find all the toys I had left out neatly arranged on my bed, facing me, and next to them, a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of a young girl, no older than 7, with bright, curious eyes and a shy smile. It was Emily, and in her arms, she was holding the handmade doll mentioned in the article. The same doll I had found in the attic of my grandmother's house, the one I had named Lily. My blood ran cold. The two incidents, seemingly unrelated, were now inextricably linked. Emily, the lost child, and Lily, the doll, were somehow connected, and they were both in my apartment. I didn't wait. I packed a single bag, grabbed my car keys, and left. I never looked back. I still don't know how the doll got from my grandmother's attic to Emily's apartment, or why Emily chose to manifest through the furniture, but I know that some stories are never truly over, and some children, once lost, continue to play in the shadows, forever seeking a playmate. Story 2. The Child in the Hallway. I was 30, a single professional, and had just bought my first condo. It was a beautiful, newly renovated unit on the 3rd floor of a converted industrial building. Exposed brick, high ceilings, and a view of the city skyline. It felt like a dream come true. I was excited to finally have a place of my own, a sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of city life. I moved in during the peak of summer, and for the first few months, it was everything I had hoped for. Then, I started hearing the sounds. Faint, at first almost imperceptible, the soft patter of small feet running down the hallway outside my unit. I'd check the peephole, but the hallway would be empty. I'd dismiss it as a neighbor's child, or perhaps the old building settling, but the sounds grew more frequent, more distinct. A child's giggle, a whispered word, the faint sound of a ball bouncing. It was always late at night, when the building was otherwise silent. I started to feel a strange presence in my apartment, a cold spot in the living room, a fleeting shadow in my peripheral vision. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard someone breathing in the room with me. I'd turn on the light, but I'd be alone. The feeling of being watched became constant, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I started leaving lights on, even when I left the apartment. Anything to dispel the oppressive darkness. One night, I was woken by a sharp rap on my bedroom door. It was soft, hesitant, like a child knocking. My heart pounded. I lay there, frozen, listening. Another rap. Then a faint, almost inaudible whisper. "Mommy." My blood ran cold. I didn't have children. I lived alone. I crept out of bed, my hands shaking as I reached for the doorknob. I slowly turned it and pulled the door open a crack. The hallway was dark, but I could see a small, shadowy figure standing there. It was a child, small and indistinct, its head tilted, as if listening. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, a silent, dark silhouette against the faint light from the living room. I could feel its gaze, a cold, empty stare that seemed to pierce through me. And then, I heard it again, clearer this time, a soft, mournful whisper. "Why did you leave me?" I slammed the door shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. I backed away, stumbling, until I hit the wall. I stood there, gasping for breath, listening to the silence. There was no more knocking, no more whispers, just the oppressive quiet of my apartment. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, the lights on, convinced that whatever was in my hallway was still there, waiting. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. I sold the condo at a loss, not caring about the money, only about getting out. I moved into a brightly lit, modern high-rise, with no hallways and no unsettling sounds. To this day, I can't stand to hear children's voices at night, and the thought of an empty hallway still fills me with a profound sense of dread. I know what happens when you hear a child's whisper in the dark, and I never want to experience that silent, mournful plea again. After the incident with the whisper, I became obsessed with finding out who the child was. I scoured online forums for my building, looking for any mention of strange occurrences, or a child who might have lived there. I found nothing. The building was old, but its history was unremarkable. No tragic deaths, no missing children. It was as if the child in my hallway was a ghost with no past, a sorrowful echo with no origin. I started to feel a profound sense of guilt. Had I somehow caused this? Was I, by my presence, disturbing a restless spirit? I tried to communicate with it, leaving out small toys, a glass of milk, a note asking who it was, what it wanted. The toys would remain untouched, the milk would sour, and the notes would be found crumpled on the floor, unread. It was as if the child was not interested in communication, only in its mournful, persistent presence. One night, I woke up to the sound of soft crying. It was coming from the hallway, a low, heartbreaking sob that seemed to pierce through the walls. I crept to the door, my heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark, but I could see a faint, almost translucent figure, huddled in a corner, its small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was the child, and as I watched, a single glowing tear seemed to fall from its face, landing on the floor with a faint, almost inaudible sizzle. I couldn't bear it. The raw, unadulterated sorrow emanating from the figure was overwhelming. I wanted to comfort it, to tell it everything would be okay, but I knew I couldn't. It wasn't a living child. It was something else, something trapped, something eternally. Sad, I closed the peephole and backed away, my own eyes welling up with tears. I spent the rest of the night listening to the silent sobs, a constant reminder of the sorrowful presence in my hallway. I sold the condo at a significant loss, not caring about the financial hit. I just needed to get out. I moved into a modern, brightly lit apartment building with no long, dark hallways and no unsettling sounds. To this day, I can't stand to hear children crying, especially at night, and the thought of an empty hallway still fills me with a profound sense of dread. I know what happens when you hear a child's whisper in the dark, and I never want to experience that silent, mournful plea again. And I often wonder if the child is still there, huddled in that corner, forever weeping, forever waiting for a mother who will never return. Story 3. The persistent knock. I was 35, living in a ground-floor apartment in a quiet, residential neighborhood. It was a charming place, with a small garden and a sense of peaceful solitude. I worked from home, so I spent most of my days within its walls, enjoying the quiet. For the first year, it was idyllic. Then, the knocking started. It was always the same. 3 distinct, deliberate knocks on my front door, always at precisely 3 a.m. I'd wake up instantly, my heart pounding, convinced someone was trying to get in. I'd creep to the door, peer through the peephole, but there was never anyone there. The porch light would be off, the street empty, save for the distant glow of a street lamp. I'd check the locks, double-check them, and then crawl back into bed, my mind racing. At first I thought it was a prank, some neighborhood kids messing around. I even considered setting up a camera, but I dismissed it. It was too consistent, too precise. And there was something about the knocking itself that was unsettling. It wasn't aggressive or demanding. It was persistent, almost pleading, a soft rhythmic thud that seemed to echo in the silence of the night. I started to feel a strange presence in my apartment, a cold spot near the front door, a faint, almost imperceptible scent of damp earth. I'd find small objects moved, a book on the floor, a picture frame slightly askew. Nothing major, just enough to make me question my sanity. I started leaving the TV on at night, a low hum to drown out the silence. To distract myself from the inevitable knocking. One night, I decided to confront it. I waited, wide awake, my eyes fixed on the clock. As the digital numbers flipped to 3 a.m., the 3 distinct knocks echoed through the apartment. This time, I didn't hesitate. I threw open the door, ready to confront whoever, or whatever, was on the other side. The porch was empty. The street was deserted. But as I stood there, peering into the darkness, I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible whisper, coming from just beyond the threshold, from the garden itself. Let me in. My blood ran cold. I slammed the door shut, fumbling with the locks, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I backed away, stumbling, until I hit the wall. I stood there, gasping for breath, listening to the silence. There was no more knocking, no more whispers, just the oppressive quiet of my apartment. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bed, the lights on, convinced that whatever was outside was still there, waiting. The next morning, I called my landlord. I told him I needed to move, immediately. I didn't give him a reason. I just packed my bags and left. I moved into a top-floor apartment in a busy part of the city, with no garden and no direct access to the outside. To this day, I can't stand to hear knocking at night, and the thought of a ground-floor apartment still fills me with a profound sense of dread. I know what happens when something persistently knocks at your door, and I never want to hear that silent, pleading whisper again. After the whisper, the knocking stopped. For a few nights, I slept soundly, convinced that my confrontation had somehow scared it away. But the silence was more unsettling than the knocking. It was a heavy, expectant silence, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath. The cold spot by the door remained, and the faint scent of damp earth grew stronger, more pervasive. I started to feel a sense of being watched, not just from the outside, but from within the apartment itself. I began to have vivid, disturbing dreams. Dreams of being buried alive, the weight of the earth pressing down on me, the taste of dirt in my mouth. I'd wake up gasping for air, my heart pounding, the feeling of suffocation lingering long after I was awake. I started to lose weight, my appetite gone, my face pale and drawn. My friends grew concerned, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. How could I explain that I was being haunted by a persistent knock and the scent of damp earth? One night, I woke up to a scratching sound. It was coming from the front door, a slow, deliberate scratching, like fingernails on wood. It was the same sound I had heard in my dreams. I crept to the door, my heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. The porch was empty, but the scratching continued, louder now, more insistent. And then, I saw it. A thin, dark line, appearing at the bottom of the door, as if something was seeping in from the outside. It was dirt, a small, steady stream of dark, damp earth, trickling into my apartment. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. The knocking, the whisper, the scent of damp earth, the dreams of being buried alive. It all made a horrifying kind of sense. Whatever was outside wasn't just trying to get in. It was already in. It was the earth itself, the grave, reaching out, trying to claim me. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and ran out the back door, not even bothering to lock it. I drove to a friend's house, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I never went back to that apartment. I hired a moving company to pack up my things, and I sold the furniture. I moved into a high-rise building, as far away from the ground as I could get. To this day, I can't stand the smell of damp earth, and the thought of a ground-floor apartment fills me with a profound sense of dread. I know what happens when something persistently knocks at your door, and I never want to feel the cold, suffocating embrace of the grave again.